Buddy, sorry for the slight delay there. I was just taking a minute to take everybody's bots out of the waiting room. I always record this and I post it every single week by the end of the day in the school community under the sales channel. So if anyone ever needs the replays, they're always going to be put there. It just becomes a hassle when I let everybody's bots. We get all kinds of automated messages and interruptions, and it's just easier without them. So again, if anyone ever wants the recordings, I post these every Tuesday within the sales channel in the school community, and you can scroll back and find all the old ones there as well. So yeah, anyway, let's kick it off with obviously welcome to another weekly DaaS Sales Workshop, which guys, when we first built our workshop series and kind of the agenda and or objective for each, I would say kind of the main focus, at least in my mind, was more around, gearing these around how to package, position, price, pitch the DaaS offerings and stuff. And not to say we don't cover that and I don't have tutorials on that or I answer questions on that and we dive into that. But it seems like a lot of us aren't even at that point. And not to say, let me clarify, I don't mean you shouldn't know what you're selling and have a rough idea of how it's priced. But what I mean is, like on last week's session, and last week I had I think there was only 4 or 5 of us on for a majority. I know, some people hop on and hop off throughout the workshop, but through the 3 or 4 people, I should say, that kind of interacted last week and told me where they were at, none of them were yet booking calls consistently, right? And that's where more of that stuff is going to come. So again, I'm not saying not have an understanding or be prepared, and I'm happy to go over that stuff. But if we're not constantly on sales calls, if we're not doing much pitching it, packaging, does it really matter if we're focusing on that? Or what do we need to do to get to the point where we're getting consistent sales calls? So I always like to kind of reverse engineer what we're focusing on and what the lessons on based on where you guys are at and what I'm getting with the feedback. Last week, I asked you all guys, and I asked a little kind of poll question at the start of this. I was like, hey, give me a number 1 if you are consistently booking calls. Give me a number 2 if you're not yet consistently booking calls, but you are putting out some consistent marketing and messaging, whether that's email or DMs or running ads or whatever. And then give me a number 3 if you're not booking calls and you're not running marketing. And everybody was either a 2 or a 3. Again, only a handful of people engaged and participated last week. But all of them except for 1 was a 3. They weren't running consistent marketing or booking any calls. So again, if we're not doing any of those things, I'm happy to dive into stuff that's going to be 6 steps down the road. I just don't see it as pressing, as relevant. So I'm trying to gear more of my lessons, although this ties right into sales and the overall sales process. It might not be fully the sales process or the sales aspect of the process, because marketing and sales go hand in hand. They work together. You'll know as your company or companies maybe you guys work or work for, as the company grows and kind of it gets its own marketing and sales department. Yeah, there could be some friction. There could be butting heads. And in, I would say, less well-run leadership types of companies, there's a lot of friction often in marketing and sales. They're blaming one another. Hey, I'm not closing deals because the marketing's not doing its job and getting us the qualified people. Or marketing, hey, I'm filling our sales reps' calendars. They're not closing deals. And it kind of goes back and forth. But they actually need to work in tandem, in conjunction. And those are the 2 departments where the feedback loop that gets opened within one another really benefits one another. For instance, all the feedback I get from my sales guys, the number 1 objections, the quality of our buyers, gets siphoned back to my marketing team so they can go adjust messaging, targeting, right? All the little intricacies and nuances. So, they play hand in hand together. And I only say that to set a little context for some of what I might be going over might be more marketing related lessons, but I'm only showing that if its primary outcome is going to be to get consistent sales calls booked, right? So we need to get some processes going or some, steady frameworks, metrics, and accountability on this kind of stuff, and then be just doing the work daily, right? So I'm going to kind of recap what I covered last week and what's going to lead into this lesson, because I know I see a few new faces. Guys, I always open up for a Q&A. Usually I do it at the beginning and the end of the session, because I figure some people hop on with a very specific question. This time I'm just going to kind of hold it to the end. I don't want to go through 2 separate Q&As. I just kind of want to get through everything I have covered, but definitely will be leaving time for a Q&A. So any questions that you either had and you came to this call with about sales, or that maybe you have throughout the lesson today, either just make a note if you're taking notes, put it in the chat and I will get back to it, or I will call on you at the end of what we're going to go through on today's workshop. But I am just going to recap and then kind of pick up where I left off last week. Some of you guys were on last week's call, so you know what I'm talking about. Some of you guys that are on this call that weren't on last week, I'm going to reiterate kind of what I covered in the founding steps last week that kind of lead into this week's lesson, and then dive right in. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen here, guys. And you know, a lot of this all ties back to, and anybody that's been on multiple lessons or workshops, or you know, worked with me in any close capacity, you're familiar with, and you've seen this acronym or this framework. There's a couple new people on the call that I'm guessing aren't that familiar with it, unless they've really dove through a lot of content and just happened to stumble across it in the last week or two since enrolling. But this EAACO framework is a big component in every aspect we do, specifically your marketing process that leads into the sales call and everything that goes into it. So just really quickly, EACO stands for engage, assess, assign, call to action, and obligation. And that's the process of every marketing funnel, really. Again, I'm thinking in my head as I'm saying this, this is 100% in alignment with what we do in our paid funnels, where we're putting ad spend, what we do in organic funnels when we're using DMs, content marketing, appointment setters, etc. Email marketing, we're still doing this. And again, so step one is we need to create engagement, right? If we don't create engagement, whatever we're doing, we put shitty ad creative out there, and it's not going to get a lot of responses, a lot of calls to action if the initial message isn't dialed in. And again, I can apply that to ads. I can apply that to social media content marketing. If I'm making posts all the time, but none of them are engaging and actually eliciting response and getting engagement, then it doesn't really matter how much I'm doing. So number one, whatever method we're doing, emails, right? I have to at least have the subject line, you know, intrigue them enough to click open the email. I mean, that's the initial engagement we're looking for with email, is at least to get an open, right? And then obviously our messaging and our body dictates the next step. So I'm going through this really quickly, and I'm going to, again, not spend a lot of time here. I have full lessons just on the EACO script, but engage, but again, to reiterate, engage, assess, assign, call to action, and obligation. So we want to engage the croc brain, as we always like to say. Sometimes that's with the initial message being something they already know and they can relate to, and then we tell them something they don't know. It could just be a great angle or hook, could be something to do with the solution, the problem, the outcome, the result. Whatever we know through testing or just through market research is going to have the highest chance to actually engage that person, to get them to watch the next message, click the open, right? Go and comment below, whatever the next step is. Then when we start really engaging and somebody interacts and goes to the next phase of our funnel, we kind of need to assess where they're at, right? So we can do this through pre-qualifying. We can do this through gathering data from a form fill. I like to do it more of the back and forth conversational way, or at least that's how I like to talk about it. More from if I was sending a couple emails back and forth after a person replied to my engagement, kind of raised their hand, or after I sent somebody a DM and they actually replied to me. Like once I get into the engagement process, then we need to assess where they're at, right? We talk about that, and the number one way to assess. And if anyone's not familiar, probably one of the best lessons and most valuable ones I taught this year was last month or maybe late October, the knowledge gap analysis. That is the whole assess breakdown in a very in-depth workshop, all about the assess phase. Then once we assess where they're at, we kind of drop them into a bucket: more established, less established, startup, company making $5,000, company making 50 grand. That will really dictate how we get to the next step when we assign the frame, when we inject our unexpected solution, for lack of a better phrase. This is normally the time we do that. So we assess somebody based off of, again, a knowledge gap analysis. If you guys aren't familiar, I don't want to go too in depth, but just through questions and answers to find and really, again, categorize which box your client falls in, or this client. I think throughout all of our ideal buyers, we're going to have a less sophisticated buyer, a more sophisticated buyer, an ideal guy, maybe right in the middle. So maybe ideally we work with companies doing somewhere between 20 and 50K when they enroll with us. We work with some that are doing 10K and some that are doing over 100K, but our bread and butter is this. So again, we're going to say something different to each one of these people. If I have somebody come into my funnel that's not yet making 10K months, and I start talking to them about how they make 100K, they're going to be they're going to be like, dude, I've never even hit 10K months. What are you here spitting 100K, and vice versa. If I go to a guy making 100K a month and hey, Bob, what if I help you hit your first 10K month? He's going to laugh at that message. This is not the right message for that buyer. So by understanding kind of where they fall on that established and or sophisticated end of the spectrum really helps us assign the message and what we're going to inject when we get into the interesting part of the conversation. And again, I always say a lot of times what we do is reframe people. You guys have heard me use this terminology before. They might come into first engaging with you thinking that they have thinking that X is the problem, whatever that is. As I say, often a client or a prospect's perception of the problem in their business is what is called a surface level or a symptom level problem, as opposed to the root or the real problem. So a lot of times they come in and say, "Hey, Ray, the problem is," and let's go with the most basic one we probably all hear as agency service providers. I just don't have enough leads, right? Okay, so that is what I call a symptom or a surface level problem. Is it the real problem? Highly, highly unlikely. And the first way to kind of point that out to a guy is, okay, so you think you need more leads, Bob? Let me ask you, out of the last 50 your team is booked, how many did you close? Well, we closed 2 out of 50. So you're telling me your close percentage is, I'm not doing the math, is that 5% or something? Whatever, that percentage is extremely low, right? So, now I might dive in and say, "Hey, Bob, did you ever think your sales process might be the problem? You're closing 2 out of 50 leads. Does it really matter if I load your sales pipeline with more leads? If it's like water pouring into a cup with a bunch of holes in the side? Or should we look at your sales process, seal up those holes, and then turn on the faucet and pour the leads or the water in? What's a better solution for you?" Oh shit, now that you mention it, yeah, I probably do want to, shore up my sales process before I pump a bunch more leads in there. Great. So let's dive in, and then I'm going to reassess and go fix his sales process and maybe charge for a service for that before. So, and again, that was just one example. I'm just kind of spitballing off the top of my head. But a lot of times, what they tell us that symptom or service level problem really isn't the main problem. Then, once we assess and assign a new problem, and they're like, "Oh, shoot, Ray, that is my problem." No matter what I say next, no matter what I inject as the solution, is going to be the unexpected solution to them. It's going to catch their eye because they came in thinking they had a totally different problem. I reframe them to agreeing with me that now they have this problem. So, whatever I say next is almost by definition the unexpected solution to them, right? And that's one way to stand out whenever we do this process right. And I say this too much, so sorry for some of you guys that are on a lot of my workshops, but the psychology and the thought process that goes on in the prospect's head is, "Hey, what Ray said is right. Nobody's really said that to me before. How do I find out more?" And of course, that's where we take them into the call to action, whatever that may be. A physical product, we might send them to a landing page. A service, we probably want to book them into a sales call, whatever. And then the obligation frame, I'm not here to touch on that too much, but that's just more like touch point messaging. Now, most people do this pretty well nowadays within the last year or so. I'd say the amount of sales teams I have doing good touch point messaging after somebody books the call has increased significantly because there's a lot more automations and AIs that do that outreach. But there's still nothing wrong. Even if you have those set up, you'll know. And I actually have internal discussions in my sales team's thread from just a day or two ago where we're talking about the manual touch points and the manual outreach, and don't just rely on automations and AI and et cetera. So again, not to say setting up frameworks and processes and automated messages aren't helpful. They can be. I still like some personal interaction, and an obligation message is simply this. If you get in a conversation with somebody or they click your ad or it's a DM conversation, let's just say on average, due to people's schedules and availability, they book about 2 days out. What a lot of people were doing specifically before, I think, again, a lot of teams increased um, the how often they're doing touch point messages and how much it's built into their system. I definitely think it's improved. My point being, a lot of times people will book people 48 hours out and then just expect them to show up, and there's no communication in between now and then. I like at minimum to have a 24-hour touch point message, something that sends out approximately 1 day before the appointment. And then I like a 30-minute or 1 hour before. I wouldn't say use both, whatever one you feel. I like the 30-minute one. But whatever. So a couple of touch point messaging, just reiterating that the call is happening. And again, always from their best interest. I have a lot of verbiage and framework on this. So, and to get all this stuff down, kind of going back to what we covered last week. Last week, I covered a few different documents, and let me just make sure I'm bringing up the right ones and I'll go over them. But I talked about fundamentals. If we want to, and a lot of the people that answered 3 last week were right, they weren't getting consistent sales calls, they weren't putting out consistent marketing efforts. I took them back to my square one template that I do with every private client I ever work with, and filling out what I like to call I put a little too much in there, for a title, but the kickoff research, objective, avatar, and approach / strategy doc. Again, it's a mouthful. I could probably name it something better, but it serves its purpose. So as a business owner, we should very simply, everything below name, which is pretty self-explanatory. That's just for me and the client I'm working with and the business owner. But everything below there, you guys should be able to answer pretty quickly yourself. Outside of maybe PDOC's research, I can explain that. Some of you guys might not understand that. That's fine. That's just another term for what more market research do I need to go do before I should really launch this? Do I need to validate my offer and see if people will buy at this price point? Am I still doing research on who my ideal client is and what some prerequisites? So that's just more for a recap that I give for people I work with, that I say, hey, Bob, after this call, I think you probably need to go research this and this some more. And it's just kind of some final notes I give to people. But everything else, you should know the niche of the industry you're targeting. If somebody asks you your offer, you should be able to explain it. And I always like to say, in 2 sentences or less, clear and concise, clear over clever with your messaging, especially when you first start talking with a market and industry. They're not going to listen to your 8-paragraph explanation, right? What can I say that's clear and concise that says exactly what I do and who I serve? Boom, boom, boom. My ideal client, you guys have probably heard my framework. I will use 3 things, 3 components to build out my avatar. Number 1 is the who. Very simply, I work with private injury attorneys. Cool. That's the who. Could be a lot of things, but very, very simple. Second, some prerequisites. I work with private injury attorneys that have been in business 5 years, that take on over 60 cases a year, and that have at least a team of 5, 5 on their staff, whatever that is, just so I can kind of know how established and where my bread and butter is. And lastly, I always like to identify what might they try, what have they tried, or what might they try instead of working with me and my agency, my data provider, my company, whatever. So what are the other alternatives that they might try, or what have they already tried? When we know those things, it's really easy to, number 1, target and reach out to our ideal person, because we define them: private injury attorneys, over this many cases, years in business, etc. Now I only target people that fit into that. And then based on what they've already tried or what they might try, helps me really dial in my messaging. Hey, Bob, I know you probably have already worked with an agency and you probably tried some of those AI voice outreach things to reach everybody on your lead. Hey, what if I could show you a system that's fail-proof that's foolproof on organizing your pipeline and making sure all your prospects gets reached out to in a timely manner? Boom, right? So again, just very, very quickly, spitballing off the top of my head. Then I tell everybody you should be able to define your immediate objective. And I like to set these in 3 barometers, but always I like to start with a 30 to 60-day objective. What is my goal here in the next 30 to 60 days? Then we could set some longer ones, but for this purpose and today, I wouldn't even really want to go beyond that. My immediate objective, if I was somebody on the call last week that was a 2 or a 3, let's say a 3 specifically, I'm not consistently booking calls or sending out messages. My immediate objective: test and dial in messaging, build out game plan of the platforms I want to use to send them, and then set some metrics to hold myself accountable for how many messages I want to send per day. Boom. That would be my immediate objective. The strategy and approach would now be like, okay, my platforms are going to be cold email and LinkedIn. My prerequisites are going to be 50 emails and 15 LinkedIn requests per day. And then now that we have the approach, the strategy, the metrics, now all you got to do is go execute on it, right? So this is the base template. This is one that I literally just filled out since we did the call last week. I sat on here with a guy last week. It was the day after. So we met on Tuesday. I met with him on Wednesday, and we just sat and mapped this out real quick as one of the first parts of working together. So I brought up a different example of last week, a client I did this with a while back, but this guy and the business where he's representing, Legacy Business Network. What is the niche of the industry my company's in? I'm more in business development and education. Okay, what is your offer? My offer is I give people access to a referral partner networking platform to create your legacy and achieve freedom. Okay, who are you looking to work with? So the who is very simply the first aspect of this. Business owners, influencers, and faith leaders. What are some prerequisites for your ideal clients? Which I think only goes to there. He only said a couple here, and he had very basic ones, and which is great, but he could define it. The ability to be able to give and take referrals, and people who believe in the fundamental principles of liberty. He doesn't want to work with people that aren't into a referral or network-based business. They're not looking for one. And he doesn't want to work with people that don't believe in the fundamental processes of liberty, because not only does he have a business, he's very mission focused. So totally get it. Quick little definition. And then, hey man, what have they tried before working with you? What might they try? They've tried to build their own social media network. They've tried paid media advertising to build a network. They might have tried paid lead gen for their business through some type of agency. They might have tried business coaching or following multiple different gurus' advice, and they're not really getting anything done, right? So now he laid the 5 or 6 things out. Hey, what is your immediate objective for this offer? My immediate objective, Ray, is just to collect market feedback. And I think the best way to do that is getting 100 beta testers on my platform for a $7 30-day trial period, which I thought he had thought out well and is totally doable. Very simple objective. This is what I want to accomplish, right? Okay. Now, how are you doing this? Are you spending money on ads? Are you doing this more? Ray, I've done everything like what I teach through my network. So I haven't done much outside of that. I don't have the budget or the bandwidth right now to run ads. So that's not really my thing. I was like, all right, so you tell me you have a warm network and you have some social media accounts. Yes, I do. Cool. So my strategy approach would be take this offer to my warm network first. Let's just say you have 2,000 followers and even 2% of them end up jumping in. There's 40 beta testers right there, right? Just from your warm network. So again, sometimes we have low hanging fruit where we don't even look. Then I would recommend going into social media and start creating some posts, hype posts, promotional posts, talk about the mission, talk about the network, talk about the value, the bonus, start creating some posts and start putting out some cold social media campaigns. Go into other groups where there's liberty fighters, where there's business owners, where there's faith leaders, and start posting your promo and your hype posts, right? So again, a lot of people overthink this stuff. I can just sit here because I've done this in so many businesses, and every aspect of this I've done well at some trajectory throughout my entrepreneur career. I know this stuff can all work, but it's very simple. A lot of times, I think many of us really, really overthink this stuff. Where like I have the blessing, I understand that I can just kind of sit down and talk to somebody, and be like, hey man, if I were you, I'd try this, this, and this, and I almost guarantee that's the quickest result, especially based on again your skill set or your budget or your lack of budget or whatever. Building things within people's bandwidth. And then, as I told them, while I started doing my warm network and social media, I would also be building out an email strategy. So, do I have an email autoresponder? What's his capabilities? Do I need to warm up domains? So, start building out that strategy for this particular guy. And then, next steps are simply we're at the point where he actually took me through his assets. He has landing pages, he has links, he has closing sites, he has payment portal, he has everything set up on the back end and kind of the inner workings. He just is really confused on how I start talking to people and how I get them to raise their hand and at least send them to the page, to the assets, right? So I was like, well, you need to be creating content, post, and dialing in your messaging. What are the top 3 or 4 hooks or entry points into the market that really hook your faith-based business owners and leaders, right? We need to identify them. We need to open the feedback loop, start getting in conversations with the market and see which messaging they're relating with, double down and create more of that, see which ones they aren't, shelf that or test it and see why it's not getting, not getting any traction, really. There's no other word to put it. And then again, for this guy, we're working together on a weekly basis now. I told him next week's call is to dive into a knowledge gap analysis so I can find some more of the what I call knowledge gaps, which are, as for any of you guys that don't know, they're kind of entry points and or angles and hooks that I would use in the market to reach my prospect, depending on where they fall in my assessed bucket, in terms of how sophisticated and established. So his next call, he and I tomorrow, we're going to dive into that aspect. But it was a very simple build out. I think this is the other one I went through last week, just more in depth. I built this guy out a bit of a game plan, but we're not going to go through it all again. I just went through one of the 2 of these, but let's just get down to like the business owner when we get down to the objective and the strategy and approach, because that's where some people, even if I lay it out very simply, they still don't always see the implementation and execution from there. So for this guy, I built it out even a step further. His objective was to get consistent bookings, fleshing out the pre-call process, and get 5 to 10 closed deals within the next 60 days of working together. His outreach approach for what he was doing and his capabilities, I told him I would use a 2 to 3 prong approach. I would probably be using email and LinkedIn primarily, or I would probably mix in some Facebook stuff as well based on his audience and his marketplace. Then we lay out what I just talked about: consistent daily requirements and metrics, convert conversation into qualified appointments. Once we do that, we can start closing deals, right? So, and then I said, hey man, for you, next steps is go over everything we in case he needs his call recording, I put that in here. That's not really relevant, but he wanted to understand how to make money with some automated assets through presentations, selling one-to-many, because he had more of a software and a tech offer than I would say a service-based or expert-based offer. So I think I think with both, you can still sell one-to-many on presentations. I think it's a little easier when you have a software, a SaaS, or a tech product, maybe more so than a high-ticket education product, but it can still be done both ways. But anyway, I was like, hey, man, here's the training I put together on how to make money with live sales presentations, actually paid live sales presentations. People pay you to come to one, and then they upsell on your back-end higher ticket offer. And then I gave him my best organic outreach approach for his LinkedIn and Facebook stuff, and the best appointment setting approach and tutorial that I put together. That was kind of everything in his next steps. Then I gave him a tutorial that aligns or correlates to every bit of his strategy or approach. And as we talked about with both of these examples, laying out the metrics. So again, I guess I'm spending a little more time on recapping last week than I like, because I want to explain it for the people that weren't there. Some of you guys, again, might be a little redundant, but I'll get through the rest of this pretty quickly because I see the time there. But very quickly, some requirements that I set for DM setters. Again, some of you guys may know for years I ran and taught a program called DM Setter Academy, where I would teach everybody what I did to make my first million plus in sales just through organic posts and DMs. That's all I did to make my first real money online per se. And again, I had some very simple requirements. So columns say B as in boy through E as in Edward here. Can you at least send 10 new DMs per day to people that you've never DM'd before? Can you at least send a total of 20 DMs per day, meaning some from your warm network or people you've had past conversations with? 10 new, 20 total. Can you send out 15 friend requests per day? And can you publish 3 social media posts? If so, I can show you a pretty clear path to booking about 2 calls per day on autopilot organically. And again, then we would track, okay, on this day, I sent out 13, 32, 15. I posted in 3 groups, and I would say, as I always say, I like to track the groups where I'm posting in, because when I was doing this organically, I would start with 10 groups that I identified that pretty much had my ideal audience. I would start making posts. After about 3 to 4 weeks, I would go back and look at this sheet, and I'd be like, okay, when I post in these 5 groups out of the 10, I book way more calls than these 5 groups. So then I would shelve the 5 groups that are booking a lot less. I would double down my post on the effective groups, and you start to see more and more engagement. Or maybe you take the 5 that are effective and you mix in 5 new ones and test those out and see how effective they are to get back to your starting with 10 groups. But that's really why I track the groups. I started to realize, hey, when I'm posting these groups, I'm booking 4 calls a day. Then I go posting these groups and I book 1 call per day. Well, as a business owner, I'm going to double down where I'm getting 4 bookings per day. And I'm probably going to back off where I'm only getting 1 and start to revise that. So again, very, very simple metrics for outreach. And then the other thing, and what I really wanted to dive into based off of last week's assignment. So I'm sorry, last week's lesson, not necessarily assignment. I think some of you guys took it as an assignment, and I might have set some homework and next best steps. But this all leads into what we're talking about with sales, right? The sales process. You guys have probably seen me talk about this in multiple videos or trainings, unless you're, again, brand new. But the power of what I call a micro commitment sales process. And again, I have full modules on this, so anybody can message me afterwards if you want some more in-depth resources or anything I didn't have time to share today. Any templates or docs that I go over and I might not drop in the chat, shoot me a DM. I can give you access to anything that I'm sharing on my screen. But this is what most companies do in what I call the usual or the old sales method. They do whatever for the first box. Could be an ad, could be email, could be social media content, whatever we do. Could be a combination, as I talk about at AudienceLab. We use 4 avenues and channels for acquisition. All of them are pumping out some type of ad or content. Then we take people to what I like I don't like it to be step 2, but in the old method, this box, I like what's called a triage call. Some people go to a pre-call application and then right to a sales call, step 3. Again, there's no right or wrong. I just think, generally speaking, you can definitely qualify a little better and make sure the right person is getting through to a sales call, having a triage rep as opposed to an automated, form fill or something. That's basically the number one reason I prefer a triage call over a form fill. But again, there's no right or wrong here. They can certainly both work. And that's what I call the old method. And as I always reiterate, the problem is when something goes wrong in your sales process, low show up rates, low closing rate, low quality ratio, whatever metrics we're tracking, it's really hard to look back at that 3-step sales process and really pinpoint where the problem was. You start to think to yourself, hey, was it the call or the messaging? Did I push too hard or not hard enough? Was that prospect even the right quality and a good fit? There's just so many variables. So as I talk about, and then the process I recommend utilizing is what I call the micro commitment process. We use 6 steps in almost all of our sales process. So the old one, the 3 steps on this were 1, 3, and 6, which means the new aspects are steps 2, 4, and 5. And again, I have a whole module going in depth and explaining those. I'm not going to have the time to dive into that today. But let's just get through the first couple and take it to step three, because that's, again, based on where everybody's at, doesn't really matter if we get to the closing call if we're not actually getting on closing calls and we're not actually booking people. You need to understand the process up to there. So we talked about engagement. We talked a little about the new frame. And again, more in depth about that is really understanding how to assess and going back through a knowledge gap analysis workshop that I did. But number three, again, I like to use the triage call here. So over to the seller's resources doc that everyone gets sent over to them when you and I do a one-on-one THO or fastest path to cash call, whatever we call it nowadays. I think we switched the name of it somewhere along the line. But this document I send to all you guys in that recap email, and I give it away each week on every one of these workshops, and it goes over a little what we did today. So like number 1 and 2 in here is much more in depth of me going over the sales process and the micro commitment build out specific to DaaS. If you have not yet seen that, check out this document. And again, I always give this away, so I'm going to go throw this in the chat right now for anybody that hasn't seen it or lost it or just never has been on one of my workshops. When you go look in the Zoom chat, that Google Doc link is to the one that we're staring at on my screen right now. But what I kind of want to focus on is number 3 in the micro commitment process is the triage call. And I want to take you through running an effective triage call in about 15 to 20 minutes. I want to spend on this, then leave time for a Q&A. I'd like to start with a quick question that I want you guys to either just raise your hand if you know how to use the hand emoji, or type a 1 in the chat if you think you have a clue. But I really want to ask 1 or 2 people and get your thoughts on this before I give the answer and dive into this. And again, some of you guys, if you've already seen me do this training, maybe you'll remember, so maybe you'll get it right. And if you think you already have this memorized, what I'm going to ask, or you know what I'm going to say, maybe leave it for somebody else. But what would you say if you've ever run any business, whether for yourself, self-employed, whether working for a sales team, another company, and you guys do a 2-call process? So there's a pre-qualifying call and then a sales call. What are the 2 primary objectives of the triage call? Why are we holding that call? What are the 2 primary things we're trying to accomplish on that call? If anyone thinks they have a clue, do me a favor and type a 1 in the chat or do the hand raise emoji, and I'm going to call on you and see if I can get an answer. Or I'd love to see somebody's guess or thoughts before I just dive in and show people, because I think it's important to kind of think about this. And maybe some of you guys are thinking, no, I don't really know the objectives at all. I just know it's part of the process and people told me to do a pre-qualifying call, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm just curious, what people have, what people's understanding or comprehension of the triage call and its process is. And so far, I don't see anybody raising their hand emoji on the screen or typing 1 in the chat, which means nobody knows the answer or nobody wants to even take a guess. Okay, Dustin, go ahead and take a guess real quick.
On triage, would you say it's going to be based on qualifying and finding out what, like you mentioned, the gap analysis, but understanding really what the problems are, assessing that, seeing if that your solution is going to help fill that gap, but then qualifying, making sure they're the right fit?
Yeah, I'd say that's certainly part of it. So you said a few things there, right? That could be taken as more than 2 components, the way you just said it, or it
Okay.
could all be called, qualified or categorized under 1. And I think you're right. And Georgetta typed it right in the chat, or at least I saw it right when you looked at it. And actually, Georgetta, you kind of got both. I would say it a little different. The first one, you're spot on. The first objective and the main objective is, are we a fit for one another? So number 1, you said it very well, Dustin. I don't know. And again, depends on your process. They're all going to be a little different on how deep you go in and how much you assess on the triage call, I think. So that's always a variable, but you need to assess enough to know if you're a good fit for one another. Not just are they a good fit to work with me, but am I also the best service provider to deliver them the result, right? Personally, if I get on a call with somebody and I know there's another expert or company or service I can help them better, I personally, I do the right thing and refer them out. I know not everybody does that, and it's not the smart thing to say, but I really only want to make offers to people that I know my company, my offer, my software, my solution can deliver them the best outcome or the best, solution to said problem. So it's really if we're a good fit for one another. But yes, you're pre-qualifying them. And the second aspect is a financial pre-qualifier. I like to call the soft yes. So as Georgetta said, can they afford? To an extent, I don't get like super in depth about the actual prices and numbers. I really don't want to do that to the sales call. But my thing within a sales process and what I like to call the soft yes, Dustin, just so you have an understanding, once I've pre-qualified and I'm kind of going to the second stage of the call, which is to book the sales call, and I'm not going to do so without that financial pre-qualifier or what I call a soft yes, something along the lines of, hey, Dustin, when we meet for our second call and go through the full, the full demonstration and overview of what we do, if you see a clear path on that day to solving your problem and to reaching your goal of 20K months, whatever that is there anything that would stop you from investing on that call to further your business, Dustin? And I ask it that very specific for a very specific reason. You could just say, if everything makes sense, would you move forward on that day? And they don't really think and they just nod their head and say yes. But if you say, is there anything stopping you from moving forward? And actually, I'm trying to pull out objections now that I don't have to get on the sales call. Now I'll find out, hey, Ray, finances might be an issue. Well, let's talk about that. Let's see if we can get something within your price range. Then would you move forward? Yeah, if you could make it fit. Or they might say, I need a business partner or spouse to make that decision. Great, Dustin. Well, what time are they available so we can all be on that call and I can answer their questions? I want to make sure everybody's on the same page and you're not sleeping on the couch because you went and did this and your wife's pissed at you, man. So let's all get on the call together. So I'm getting them to say, hey, man, is there anything that would stop you from investing to further your business and solve that problem or receive that outcome? That's a big difference than just saying, would you move forward if it all makes sense? It actually gets them to think. And I always, throughout my whole process, I'm trying to do this in my automated messaging, in my DMs or my automated outreach when I speak with somebody, but I'm always trying to pull out objections before the actual sales call so we can knock them down, overcome them. And the sales call can just be a discussion about solutions, problems, outcomes, and results. I want it always about those four things. I don't want to go too in the weeds. I don't want to go too, and not to say it's not going to happen, right? We're going to get objections and have to overcome them, but the less of them that come, the better it's going to be. And when we get objections, the problem is when you don't suss them out throughout your sales process and you get to the end of the sales call. I'm curious if this has happened to anybody. I'm almost guaranteed that it's happened to at least somebody. But then you get hit with like four objections at once. Well, Ray, the price, I need to think about it. I'm still in a contract with another provider and I'm just not sure, right? So then you get all these objections. And what a lot of business owners or sales reps or business owners that place themselves in their role as sales reps, but maybe they're not a seasoned sales pro, the biggest mistake they make is trying to come back and overcome all those at one shot and not isolating them and saying, hey, let's take objection number one and talk about it. Boom. So whenever you get multiple objections, which again, back to my whole point with this, the more we can suss out throughout the process, the less we're going to get at the end. But once you get multiple, if that's happening to you guys, always isolate them and overcome them one at a time. Never try to lump in two or three objections with one objection overcoming response. It's probably going to shoot you in the foot. Not easy to do, and I just wouldn't recommend it. So yeah. Actually, that's about what I'm going to dive into next year. I was just kind of reading that, but like, do you have a line of questioning for DaaS on the triage call? I 100% do. And are you framing your first call as a qualifying call? So this is normally how I frame the first call. I talked about this, I believe, a little last week. But when I'm going into book a triage call, let's just say I was doing this through organic and DM setting, and I assessed where they're at. I assigned a new problem. They said, "Yeah, Ray, that makes sense. I'd like to find out more." I would reply with, hey, Dustin, why don't we do this? I'm going to send you over a brief little 5-minute video showing you exactly how we've helped a dozen other businesses overcome that same problem you're having, whatever, not enough leads, Facebook ads, whatever it is, right? Send you over a video. In addition, I'm going to drop my calendar booking link here. Dustin, why don't you just grab a date and time that's best for yourself? And that way I can build out a blueprint of what this would look like in your business. And let's just talk about that. That's how I'm always positioning it. Prior to getting them on a call, we've given them some general information, a general video. Now I'm going to customize it to your business and give you a little one-on-one time. It's much easier to do that in a quick little 15 or 20-minute discussion than here in Messenger, Dustin. Book a call when you got a good day and time. So that's how I always position it. And then when I get on the call, I kind of frame it as, hey, Dustin, I know we only have about 15, maybe 20 minutes tops for this call, and I really want to deliver the most value. So let's just start with you diving in and giving me a little overview of your business. Why don't you tell me where you're at, what's going on in your business, and tell me about some of the challenges. Just talk openly about where you're at and what you're going through. And I just kind of sit back and shut up. I like to give it one open-ended question at the beginning and seeing how much info I can get. And that really is going to determine and or dictate which questions I need to go into on my script. So back to my screen, this is a triage call framework I've already built out for you guys for the DaaS process. It's within that document that I dropped in the chat already. It's number 4, if I'm not mistaken, right here. The seller resource doc, yeah, number 4. So I just opened this one. You guys all have access to this. And this is where I go in deeper with the lesson. So these are the main questions we want to answer. We want answered throughout the call. Yeah, it has 2 primary components. Make sure they're a good fit and pre-qualify and vice versa. And soft yes in terms of a financial objection. Now, when I dive deeper into what you were talking about, Dustin, to assess, to understand where they're at, now I want to understand the kind of what, who, where, why, and how, right? What does that business owner do? What's their offer? Who is their target market and who do they help? Where are they at now? Where do they want to go? Goals in the business and then why are they want to get there? That's always an important one. hey Ray, I want to make 50K. If you never go in and ask the why behind that and everything's just about money, eventually the passion and the kind of and excitement for one's business starts to die. I like to hear the people's why behind it, and that also helps me correlate stuff. Like a lot of guys, I remember this one guy I started working with, one of my first high ticket clients ever, at least within my first crop of 20, Joe. And I remember talking to him. He's like, hey Ray, I want to go from 10 to 40K a month. One of the main reasons being I want to take my wife on her dream vacation. So then when I got to the end of the sales call, I was like, hey Joe, if I could show you a clear path to go from 10 to 40K months, which you agree on, I just showed you, and you can easily take your wife on those dream vacations, is that something you want to move forward with? So now I'm tying it back down to something much more personal than a 40K month, right? And I think that's always relevant too when I use what I call tie downs or recap their words. It's much better to tie into the emotional outcome or result or desire they're looking for than just a monetary figure. Yeah, that can be great. And certain people are analytical, but there's always an emotion behind that dollar somewhere. So we can find that out. It's really good. It's kind of funny I mentioned that. I have a testimonial from Joe after we worked together for about 6 months, where he goes, Ray, not only am I on that vacation with my wife, I made 40K while on vacation this week. I was trying to make 40K a month when I started working with. Now I'm making it while I'm on vacation. So it was a really cool testimonial for that to come full circle. But it was more impressive for me and more, rewarding to see the big smile on his face and him taking his wife on that dream vacation. It was really cool how it all worked out, and he became, one of my highest money. He turned his business over 6 figures a month into $1 million a year business through paying us 6K once to work with us. So that was a great ROI that this guy made, and it was great to hear about. But again, I still remember that first conversation and tying down why he wanted it to that vacation. And I didn't realize that vacation would play back into our story later, right? Like it did, but that was just a cool kind of, cake frosting on the cake, right? But again, so when I open up the call, sometimes I'll just start off, and this would be more of an automated. So if somebody clicked on one of my ads, if somebody went through a one-on-one conversation and I recommended why they booked the call, I'm probably not going to lead with this. Okay. So again, but if somebody just clicks an ad, I always like to say, hey, Dustin, what intrigued you to hop on the call today? Well, Ray, I saw your ad and I really like the idea of that low fulfillment DaaS agency, right? So now the more and more I hear what hook is getting them to book the call, I give that feedback back to my marketing department. We go double down spend on that hook. We start to create other variations. So that's one big reason I asked that question. I like to understand what got in their mind and what's the main thing that made them want to hop on the call. And in addition to that, I might say something like, hey, Dustin, we have about 15 minutes here together today. In a perfect world, what would you like on the outcome of today's call? That way I can kind of structure it and just talk about what's relevant to you. That's another question I like at the beginning that really helps me streamline my call. Well, Ray, based on our conversation, I would just like some more information about that video you sent me and how that would work for my business. And of course, I'm always here to find out about price. Cool. Well, we'll talk about price and do that a little later, Dustin. But let's dive into your first aspect and make sure that this would work for your business and make sure that the vision works for you and you're happy with this, because I think we can agree here, if you don't really see this being a viable solution, it doesn't really matter what I say as a price, right? Oh yeah, you're right, Ray. It doesn't. Okay, cool. So let's start, and then boom, I'll get into my stuff. So again, pretty much everything is bold is what's in the script, and then the stuff in the smaller lettering is just kind of my training going over this. So hey, we have about 15 or 20 minutes to speak here today. In a perfect world, what would you like to know? So what I just said, right? And they might come back saying exactly what I just said. Awesome. So quite frankly, man, I'm not even sure if we can help you at this stage. So can you give me a little background on what we do, your offer, your price point, your niche, and some of the info regarding, the offer that you're currently running? Just tell me what's going on. And again, that's kind of what I was talking about with that open-ended question. And then that will lead me into the gathering intel phase. So I found when I ask that open-ended question, you usually get one of two extremes. Either the very short answer, well, Ray, I have an agency and I've been in business 5 years, right? You might get that guy, or you might get the guy that's going to talk for 43 paragraphs about what he's been doing. And you might actually have to cut him off and chime in just because of how long they go. But I like to get them talking. And normally they're probably going to answer a lot of these questions. Like once we get into the gathering intel, how much are you making per month? And again, with these ones, I gave you guys the example of I switched it. The bold is just the note. That's not what I would actually say to the client. This is what I would actually say to ask that. So tell me, what's the current monthly revenue of your business, Bob? And where would you like it to be, let's say, in the next 90 days or so, right? So that's kind of, I always like to frame these as a two-part question for a number of reasons. One-part questions can get you very short answers. What's the currently monthly revenue of your business? 40K. And then the momentum kind of dies and you got to build it up. And that feels like more like a interrogation or interview back and forth than a discussion where I'm like, hey, where you are and where would you like to be? Well, Ray, We're currently at 40K months, and ideally, I think we have the bandwidth and the foundations to double in size. It's just that marketing isn't operating enough to get us that business. Okay, cool. So you have 40, you'd like to be at 80K. And correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but you just said kind of marketing is the big roadblock from you getting there. Is that what I heard? Yeah, it is. Awesome. So that gave me a lot more information than me just asking, how much do you make per month, right? I'm never going to get that information if I ask the question that way. So again, this one, I think I actually made a little relevant toward DaaS, but I think I built this framework for two purposes, because I was also working with companies that were looking to bring in new sales reps or were a high ticket sales rep. So there might be some stuff in here about sales processes and sales stuff. I think that was both relevant to business owners as well as working with high ticket remote reps or people looking to find roles. So you're always going to want to tweak these questions a little bit. I always call this a framework. This is malleable. I would never take exactly what I have on the screen and copy and paste and go do it in your business, because you probably use a little different terminology and verbiage than I, right? Make it your own. Make it authentic, make little tweaks. You might ask the question differently. You might ask the exact same question. You might just change the verbiage or the order of how you say the words. Do it what's natural to you. Don't just copy what I have on screens when I give you guys frameworks. But again, we dive into all that. And then really the second aspect of the call, now that we've gone through the gathering intel phase, the second aspect is the transition to the advisor. So basically, once we pre-qualify them, we would say something like this. So Bob, based on what you've told me here today, it seems like, again, the marketing process is the main issue you're facing in your business that's holding you from 40 to your 80K goal. Would you agree? Yes, I would, right? We really like to tie them down to one specific problem. Ideally, is sometimes maybe two or three. Yeah, I would never on a triage call go beyond two. And what I found is even if we can start to solve problem 3, 4, and 5 for a business owner, they're really going to pay up to solve problem 1 and 2. They don't care as much about problem 3, 4, and 5. So I'm always really trying to tie them down to one specifically. Sometimes there's two very pressing problems that might be 1A and 1A. Sure, then I might entertain both. I'm never going beyond that, just to tell you. And then he's going to say yes. So Bob, is this something you want fixed sooner or later? Well, Ray, ideally, I want this marketing problem fixed like yesterday. Great, man. I hear you. And I completely understand why you would want that marketing kind of, roadblock in your business fixed ASAP. I can imagine it's been very frustrating trying to solve this so far. But based off what you told me here today, if you're really wanting to fix this problem, and this is actually something that we do, and I believe we can help with very, very well, to help you hit those 80K months in the shortest time possible. This is what I would recommend from here, Bob. I'd recommend getting on a call with my senior advisor, Danny, and he can show you exactly, you guys can have a chat and he can show you further into this process. He can dive through all the pricing. He can give you a timeline and expectations on how long he think it'll take to go from that 40 to 80K month, and really the whole trajectory and build out and blueprint in between. That way, on that call, you're going to have a clear path into, yes, this is the solution I need, or no, I don't. If I could give you a little more clarity, are you open to having that call? Yeah, right. I'm open to having that call. Boom. And then I go in and book them, right? And then once they're booked in, this is where we get down to. So another thing I have in my process, I think it was number 5. It might be number 5 in the micro commitment process. I talk about the alignment phase. That is more for a sales process where you're not the only guy. If you're taking the triage and the sales call and there's no introductions or no multiple reps, you don't really need the alignment phase. But when you do, and it's something I mixed in, that really helps us stand out in the sales process and the sales journey. Everybody talks about the customer experience and the customer journey, and that's all well and good. I'm not saying you shouldn't focus that on in your business, but if you can make people feel special or different in the sales process before they ever pull out their credit card and pay you, that actually stands out a long way. And this is one of the things that throughout my sales teams I've built and managed and overseen, where I've got the best feedback on, hey guys, I can just tell you appreciated me and you listened. I was more thought, they just could tell we were more thoughtful. We cared about them. So what I say to them is, hey man, so what I'm going to do, since I booked you in with my senior advisor, Danny, Friday at 2, I'm going to do a little messenger intro where I'm going to loop you in, give you an intro to Danny. I'm going to fill him in on everything we talked about here today, Bob. That way you guys don't have to rehash that conversation. He can have a full summary and you guys can just hit the ground running and get the most productivity out of your call Friday at 2 p.m. Awesome, Ray. That'd be great. Then I do the little message intro and that. And I always say that way you're also connected with one another too, in case one of you guys is running a few minutes late or you get double booked or something comes up, you guys already have an open chain of communication. So this aspect really helps with standing out and showing that you and your team are aligned throughout the process, but also it helps with show up rates, because if you have that open chain of communication, they're a lot less likely to ghost a senior advisor they're already in a messenger thread with, as opposed to somebody they've never seen, met, or spoken with. So again, and then lastly, we get into the soft yes, which I talked about. Now, if everything makes sense on your call, on your end, and you can see a clear path to hitting those 80K months, and of course the finances line up, Bob, because that's got to make sense. Would there be anything that would stop you from investing to further your business on that call Friday at 2 p.m.? Right. And then I go in and kind of break that down. So that's kind of what I wanted to cover. I got through a majority of it. Sure, I could have gone in more or less depth on any of that. Let me go back and check the chats. And if anyone has any questions, either about what was covered here today or just anything about our sales process, packaging, position, pricing, type a 1 in the chat. I will call on you. Let me just read through these real quick. So are you framing? That's where I left off. Not interested when you barely said about providing a business. Question, not interested. When you barely said it is about providing with. I'm not exactly sure what your question is, Dora. Am I just reading it? Maybe am I slow today? When you barely said it is about providing you with visitor identity solving data. Okay. I think I know what you're saying there. So for me, when it comes to, if you're asking about like the pre-qualifying part about somebody, and we're talking about the main thing we're trying to pitch or sell in the marketplace is the super pixel, the identity resolution tool. For me, the pre-qualifying is usually around 2 metrics. Can go a little beyond that, but it's usually about how many visitors are you currently getting to your website, an average order value of your product and or service. If those are both above numbers where I think it's going to be a home run, I want to dive deeper in. If they're not getting enough hits, or you're dealing with somebody that's got 5,000 hits to their website, but they're selling a $4.99 fountain pen, you're gonna have to move a lot more than a few hundred units to get a huge ROI on a $4.99 item, right? So again, those are usually the prerequisites. Not sure if that was your question. Oh, then you just added more there. Okay. Or maybe I didn't see that. Objection, have enough in the pipeline. Yeah, that's a real rare objection. I don't know anybody that's truly satisfied with their pipeline. And if they have enough in their pipeline, why aren't they getting the sales or the revenue or the amount of deals that they're currently getting? It's either they're not managing their pipeline, maybe they don't have as much in it or as they thought, or their pipeline is not quality. So if my objection is, hey, I have enough people in my pipeline, great. And how are you acquiring them? Well, we're running cold email campaigns and ad campaigns. Well, would you think it would make more sense to retarget people that visited your website in the last month that already know about your brand and your product, or somebody in your next cold email campaign? So yeah, you might have enough in your pipeline, Georgetta, but what if I could give you that higher quality person that already knows about your brand and your products, as opposed to some cold traffic? So again, that's still going back into what I just said with reframe. They gave me there what I would call a symptom or a service level problem, and then I reframed it. Sure, you might have enough in your pipeline, but might not be quality, or you might not be squeezing your pipeline. You could have a lot in there, but if it's not turning into revenue, I've worked with a lot of business owners that have great pipelines, doesn't lead to bottom line revenue though, and that is a problem. So hopefully that's kind of what you meant. I was hoping that was helpful. Aiden, you put a 1 in the chat. Go ahead, and then I'll call on you next, Dustin.
Yeah, I think mine's just like a quick question. So I was wondering, when you said basically post content on groups, are you mainly referring to like Facebook groups as a channel? Is that correct?
That's what I was referring to. Now let me be very clear on this. When I was doing it consistently, and when I was more teaching it regularly, I think Facebook groups were a lot more fruitful then than they are now. If I were doing it today and starting from scratch, I'd probably be going more in school communities, more communities that are getting more engagement, more monetization, that have more gamization, gamification, I should say, within the platforms. Those are really hitting a bit better. Not to say Facebook groups still won't work. I have a list of got to be 50 Facebook groups deep that I've converted bookings in over the years. I have my top 10, and then I've evolved and I grew more of them. Happy to share that if anybody wants them, let me know. Again, and then I did them about specific industries. So my first 10 groups, if I remember right, again, I'm going back a few years. I just want to say is like entrepreneurs, business owners, and people to launch their first product. I think that's who I was initially working with. So I was looking for those type of people. Then I went a little further into coaches and consultants, then experts and authors, and then just digital marketing agencies by themselves. And I started to join. So I have segmented list of groups that I've had success in. I don't think they are the low hanging fruit they were 5 years ago as a whole entity, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Sounds good. Yeah, sorry, just one follow-up. In that scenario, do you think it's best if I just go for like LinkedIn outreach, email, and then as for content, I can post sometimes on LinkedIn and most of the time on school communities, as you mentioned? Is that a pretty good game plan for now?
100%, 100%. Yeah, I personally believe organic for B2B with the data as a service, LinkedIn and cold email are probably the low hanging fruit and the bread and butter. As long as you guys are doing it consistently, your profile's optimized, you tested or have compelling messaging, I think that's your low hanging fruit. Personally, I'm like you just mentioned, I would mix in some type of social media groups as well. I think school is probably better nowadays than Facebook, not to say both can't or won't work. Gotcha. Dustin, go ahead. You had one more question, I think.
Yeah. So as far as structuring the triage call, how do you kind of position that with your call to action? Because what I'm doing right now is I'm currently just offering like a 20-minute fast demo. So I want to figure out how to kind of switch that messaging up. So that would go triage, and then it's kind of two parts. So I am handling the triage call, and I would be handling the sales call. So I wouldn't be pushing that off to someone else. I'll handle both.
Gotcha. So let me just understand before I get to the main part of this. But you said you're currently doing a one call process. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, I'm pushing it's just a 20-minute fast demo. That's kind of,
If
yeah.
it's 20-minute fast demo, number one, how much time are you actually doing the demo out of that 20 minutes? Is it the whole thing, or is there 18 minutes of conversation? Just tell me the
Yeah.
ratio.
Yeah. So what I do is I understand what their business model is on the questions that I'm asking on the form. So when they get that, I already have their URL. And then what I do is I do my own kind of research. And so I'm going into the platform. So I'm going into AudienceLab, and I'm finding the audience so that I can go in on the call. Doing like the fact finding. Like, I guess I need to add more to the triage element of that, but I need to get deeper. And so from there, I would say it's like 15 to 17 minutes and 3 minutes demo, and then close.
Okay, so the actual demo aspect's only about three minutes or so of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so this is how I would structure it if I were you. I would make a two-call process. First one, 15 minutes. Second one, probably about 30 minutes. And I would set the expectation of the first call is simply for me to get a good understanding, Dustin, of who you are, where you're at, and what you're looking to accomplish. That way I can send you over some resources and some overview of what we can do, and we can talk about it. And if we think we're a good fit, we would set a second call where I can set you up for an in-platform demo and really walk you through it. So I wouldn't ever, obviously right now in a one call thing, and totally understandable, you're positioning that as a demo, and that's why they're booking. If you don't even talk about the demo until you're on the triage call, and that's where you first bring it up and say, hey, that's not the objective of today's call, happy to set a demo, but let's just make sure we're a good fit, we both have our goals aligned, and my service or product can really help you get there. If so, we'll set a time for a demo call. And then my transition is this. Again, when I've set the expectations right, and when I know I'm doing both parts, there's no multiple reps like you just asked about. When I start, I'm like, hey, Dustin, we have about 15 minutes here, and I want to be respectful of both of our time. And I know I'm on back to backs. I got a pretty full calendar. So I want to make sure we get through everything. So the agenda of today's call is for me to get a good understanding of your business, what you're looking to accomplish, and a couple of your biggest challenges, as well as your biggest goals. That way I can give you the best recommendations and suggestions with how using, and again, I don't remember your services off the top of my head, but
Mhm.
data as a service, right? As a vehicle to help you get that result, right? So I just want to really make we're a good fit and get a good understanding. And then as we're winding down, let's say we're about 12, 13 minutes in, that's kind of where I position. Hey, Dustin, I know we only had 15 minutes for today's call, as I said, and that's winding down here in the next 2 to 3 minutes. So let's do this. I certainly think that now I have all the information I need. I certainly know you're a good candidate for our service, and we can help you hit that goal. I want to send you over this good little automated resource, which I like to create what I call a program overview video, something between 7 and 10 minutes. That's kind of like an automated asset that I can send that's very general, but covers a good description of the deliverables and the outcomes and results they should see from said deliverables, right? So, hey, I'm going to send you this resource. And then why don't we book in another call where I can block out 30 minutes, Dustin? Now that I have all this information, we can dive right in. I can assess a little deeper, and then I can do a demo call. And again, you may find for you, Dustin, you don't even need the 30 minutes. That might go to a 15 or a 20-minute call, but I would just set that expectation. And again, once you get through 10 minutes of your discovery section, pre-qualifying the soft yes, you're going to find that you're about 12 to 15 minutes in, and then you
Mhm.
just want to position for that second call and say, hey man, this time I want to block out a full 30 minutes to make sure we don't run up against it, walk you through the full demo, and let me show you a clear path to get said solution, said results, said outcome.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, thank you.
Great. And that ended right up at the clock as we're up against the top of the hour. So Let me just check the chat one more time, see if we have any last questions. Okay, they had to hop off anyway, totally. Again, hopefully you guys found this valuable. I'm running out of the house to run a couple errands, but when I get back, I will have this recording uploaded in the school sales channel by the end of the day. And if anything I covered on this call that you guys might have jotted down, a script, a framework, a template that you guys want, shoot me a DM in school and I'll get you the hard copy or the template or the original or whatever. All right, guys, have a great
Thanks,
rest of your
Ray.
day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.